Welcome to Spotlight Sessions, where we shine
What's
a light
your
on
story?
incredible impact. What does accessibility mean to you?
What's your mission?
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Spotlight Sessions. I'm Avital, today's host, and I'm really excited to be speaking with Juliëtte Sterkens, who's an audiologist for the Hearing Loss Association of America. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for inviting me.
Of course. Thanks for being here. We're so happy to be having this conversation. So why don't we dive right in? Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I'm an audiologist. I actually moved to the United States from the Netherlands 41 years ago. Time flies, you know. And I was a speech language pathologist. When I moved to the States, I became an audiologist and worked in a private practice since 1983. And in 88, I bought the business and I worked as an audiologist in a small community in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. And in 2008, I found out that a technology that can help people with hearing aids hear so much better was making a comeback in the United States. And I thought, "Ooh, I got to do this. I got to help my patients hear better."
Mhm.
And so I started this advocacy. And before I knew it, I wasn't just advocating for my patients, but I was advocating in other communities, working with audiologists in the state of Wisconsin, kind of nudging them to also talk about this technology, and kind of rolled into this advocacy work that I am now full-time involved with.
Amazing. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the Hearing Loss Association of America?
Yeah. So consumers who lose their hearing, frequently in the beginning, they lose their hearing just very gradually. But as the hearing loss worsens, they look for organizations that can help them, that can support them. And HLAA, that is the Hearing Loss Association of America, it's the largest organization in the US that is there to support consumers with hearing loss, teach them how to live better with hearing loss. The organization dates back to 1979, originally was called Self-Help for the Hard of Hearing, or SHUSH, and it's really focused on consumers helping other consumers. So it works through support groups around the country, hundreds of support groups, and they publish a magazine. They do a national convention every year. And of course, now because of COVID, a lot of meetings have gone online.
Right.
And that means that consumers all over the US can listen to lectures or attend meetings from chapters that they otherwise would have never attended. And it's a community of people who live with hearing loss. This is not a community of people who are deaf, although some may call themselves deaf. The majority of them don't use sign language. And the majority depends on wearing hearing aids, cochlear implants, and really depend on good sound input. And of course, being someone who makes recordings, you're very much aware that having a good microphone of the person you're interviewing makes a huge difference. And the same applies to people who have hearing loss and wear hearing aids. They depend on good sound input.
Definitely amazing. And it's so interesting how, with all of the sad and horrible things that COVID brought, I think the accessibility to technology and accessibility to information has really increased. And just with what you were saying before, how we were all kind of forced to use these assistive technologies more, and it has really opened the door for so many communities to, interact and also to get information. So I think that's
Yes.
amazing.
And of course, if you use Zoom, you are
Mhm.
probably aware that you can have closed captions
Mhm.
on Zoom. Now, of course, they depend on people speaking clearly and distinctly, those because they're automatically generated
Mhm.
speech recognition. But what a lot of people don't know is that the person who organizes the Zoom meeting has to activate the captions on his or her account
Mhm.
before a person on the other end can see the captions. Now, with Google Meet, as a consumer, I can just turn captions on and you'll never know whether I'm using captions or
Mhm.
not. But with Zoom, it's a little different.
Mhm.
But yes, everybody is now more aware that Zoom and captions make a big difference.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
that's wonderful because it's really improved how people who have hearing loss
Mhm.
can participate in these
Yeah,
events.
amazing.
Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit about your work within the Hearing Loss Association of America?
Yeah, so I alluded to the fact that I got involved when I found out about a technology called hearing loops. Now,
Mhm.
to go back, hearing loops were already in existence when I was doing my student teaching back in the late 70s in the Netherlands. And a hearing loop, in its simplest format, is a wire installed in the ceiling or in the floor underneath the carpeting. And when an audio signal is fed through that wire, it creates changes in the magnetic field that if the hearing aid has what is called a T-coil or a telecoil, in effect a little antenna built in, when the consumer turns that telecoil on, frequently it means pushing a button or swiping an app on your phone,
Mhm.
the audio from a stage or a lectern or a computer program gets wirelessly broadcast into the hearing aid. And that means that the consumer with hearing loss gets really good audio. So you can walk into a synagogue, you can walk into a church or a meeting room, sit down, activate the telecoil, and be able to hear the sound as if you are inches away from the mouth of the
Wow.
speaker or the presider. And that benefit is tremendous because what people don't realize, the average person doesn't realize, that hearing aids don't restore hearing the way glasses restore vision. Hearing aids at best correct hearing loss for about half. So
Mhm.
half of the hearing
Wow.
loss gets corrected. That means hearing aids do a pretty good job in 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 feet distance, 2 arms lengths, normal conversation. But when a person is trying to hear sound from further away, it's like they're hearing the sound through a funnel, and the funnel gets wider and wider and wider, and therefore picks up more and more background noise. And the person with hearing aids really struggles to hear. And that's the standard complaint. People with hearing loss say, my hearing aids work okay, but there's always a but. And the but is I can't hear when it's noisy. I
Mhm.
can't hear in church because the kids are making noise next to my microphone and now I can't understand, or they're shuffling their feet, or in the restaurant they're picking up too much background noise. And hearing loops make a huge, I can't overstate it. The hearing loops for some people with hearing loss are life changing. They realize that they can hear through their hearing aid that they have in their ear, hear so much better in some of these public places.
Mhm.
And that's really what led me to not just advocate for loops here in Oshkosh and not just in the state, but for HLAA. I carry the name National Hearing Loop Advocate. It's a very fancy title, but basically, I function as a person in the States who advocates for loops, educates consumers, educates audiologists.
Mhm.
I get emails from teachers who say, how can I hear better in school? librarians who have trouble hearing at the service desk, and consumers who say, I absolutely can't hear in my place where I work or when I go and worship. And that's when I kind of jump into gear. I advocate, I provide information, but behind me is a whole team of volunteers from HLAA, hard of hearing volunteers, who belong to the Get in the Hearing Loop committee.
Mhm.
And the committee is working to create materials that consumers can use. And it's now been published in kind of a book form, that consumers can use to become better advocates, because these hearing loops don't get installed unless people speak up, unless consumers speak up, unless audiologists teach the consumer how they can hear better in places where their hearing aids don't deliver. And then, of course, I also educate, I work with theaters or with librarians to make their meeting rooms more accessible, provide information, send information, answer um, requests for information. And I actually do that. I've done it for locations around the world.
Mhm.
It's a big world.
Yeah.
But um, when you can make people hear so much better that they too become more avid advocates, that's how this technology moves forward. In some countries, it's mandated, and I'm specifically thinking of Australia and in the UK, where they mandate that hearing loops are the go-to technology.
Mhm.
In the US, the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, doesn't mandate that hearing loop is the go-to technology. They let it up to the venue. And so a theater may install a system that requires the consumer to go to the front desk and pick up a listening device
Mhm.
with very generic sound. And I am trying to change that dialogue, um, to take the person who's hard of hearing into account. What is it that they would prefer, not what is it that's easiest for you to install?
Definitely. Wow, that was such an amazing answer. I have to say,
Sorry, I'm
no, no,
long-winded.
no. It was really great, super informative, and I feel like I've learned so much. I really did not know what hearing loops were before this conversation. Um, and I work in the realm of accessibility and, talk to organizations every day, and this is definitely something new. So I'm sure that our listeners will also find this very informative,
Yeah.
and really interesting. And I'm curious, if there are any businesses or any venues who are interested in having this type of assistive technology installed or set up within their locations. How do they go about and do so?
Yeah. So HLAA, if you Google HLAA, just the
Mhm.
initials, and the initials get in the hearing loop, GITHL, all the resources that we have developed pop right up.
Mhm.
It's one of the first two links on the Google search. Then there is an organization called the International Hearing Loop Manufacturers Association, ILHIMA, H International H, I'm sorry, ihlma.org.
Mhm.
And on that organization, you can find the companies that make hearing loop technology, that manufacture the equipment. There's also installers that can be found in that, on that website. And it's important because hearing loops require trained installers. This is not just a plug and play system. Hearing loops require the installation of wire, copper wire. It can be very flat wire installed under carpeting or in the grout of a tile floor or in the ceiling if it's a
Mhm.
dropped ceiling. But it requires a trained installer who can measure the magnetic field and make sure that it has very good sound quality.
Amazing.
Um, yeah, for the viewers, I want to make them aware that this is the international symbol for hearing access, but the letter T stands for telecoil, and that's the indication that a place has a hearing loop installed. If the T is missing, it generally means that the facility has a system that requires the consumer to go out and pick up a generic
Mhm.
listening device. So I encourage your viewers to look for this symbol, to
Definitely.
take photographs. We are working with Google Maps to get hearing loops listed on Google Maps so that hopefully in the near future you can walk into a facility, and if you have your phone set up, your phone will go ding.
Mm,
This place offers hearing loop technology,
that's
so that
amazing.
as a consumer you are more aware, and all that information about Google Maps
Mhm.
and how to find the information is on the Hearing Loss Association's website,
Mhm.
hearingloss.org.
I mean, that's amazing. I think you're reaching, you're striving for all different levels of accessibility and really trying to make this technology accessible to people in a variety of different ways. So I think that's amazing. Since we are on the topic of businesses installing this technology, I know that you mentioned this previously, but just for a refresh for our viewers, our listeners, as far as the person who has hearing loss, this is it already within the implant or within their hearing aid? Is it something additional that they have to purchase or install or anything like that?
No, most cochlear implants
Mhm,
have the technology built in. The hearing aids, for people who have more significant hearing loss, frequently the telecoil is built in. Part
mhm,
of my work is also educating consumers that they need to ask for this technology. In some countries, like again the UK, the National Healthcare Service dictates that all hearing aids paid for by the National Healthcare Service have the T-coil built in. Um, I think as a business owner, of someone who is watching this video and is wondering, what can I do to be more accessible? If you use a microphone in your facility, it might be a funeral home where you have gatherings and you're using a microphone on the lecture. Anywhere there's a microphone used, a hearing loop can be installed.
mhm,
Now, if you're dealing with the public and there's glass, again, frequently there's little microphones that are being used, but they sound terrible for
mhm,
people who are hard of hearing. Well, a hearing loop can be installed at a service counter, at a ticket desk. Um, but it requires the installation of a microphone near the person who's sitting behind that desk so that sound can be transmitted to the hearing aids. Um, I think I would also want to make the viewers aware there's other technology, and
mhm,
it might be as simple as having an app on a smartphone or on an
mhm,
iPad that captions everything you say. So if you're dealing with somebody who's very hard of hearing, those apps frequently are free of charge. I'm thinking of Otter and Ava. The iPhone has an app. Android phones have captioning apps, and they work remarkably well, and immediately it makes communication with a person who's very hard of hearing much
mhm.
easier.
Amazing. Well, Juliet, this was such an educational spotlight session. I have to say, I've learned so much, and I'm sure that our listeners will have too. Thank you so much for taking the time to sit and chat.
My
We will, of
pleasure.
course, have all of this information in the description on YouTube. And we, of course, also have closed captioning on these videos as well for all of our users. Um,
Perfect.
but yeah, it was great speaking with you, and I look forward to our next conversation.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Of course.